It's the beginning of a new month, and that can only mean one thing. It is time for your piping hot monthly Bitcoin digest, where we cover the biggest happenings in the world of Bitcoin. Let's jump in. Welcome back to another video. My name is Ian Major. I'm an entrepreneur, Bitcoin pleb, and all-around raging capitalist. And I'm a little bit behind in my scheduling here with everything going on with our startup, with the World Cup. But we are here nonetheless, putting out the latest and greatest Bitcoin monthly digest. Today's edition, we are going to cover a little bit on macro, as we typically do in these more zoomed out sessions. We'll also take a look at what I will call regulators revealing their true selves, and we will finally cover some topics on Bitcoin mining. So you are not going to want to miss a thing. For those returning to the channel, welcome back, my friends. As always, it is a pleasure to have you. And for those new to the channel, I welcome you as well. If you like this type of content, I invite you to consider subscribing and join us in our growing merry gang in cyberspace. We are closing in on 4,000 subscribers, and that is pretty bonkers. And when I started this channel, I guess technically at the end of 2020, early 2021, I had really zero expectations. I just thought I would cover topics that I enjoy covering, and if they help even one person, then that was a win. So it has been an awesome journey thus far. And so come along for the ride if you are so inclined. I cover all manner of Bitcoin related content, including a whole slew of tutorials on how to acquire Bitcoin, secure it, privacy best practices, running your own node, and more. You want it, I cover it. That is how this works. But with all that out of the way, let's jump into our first topic for today and take a bit of a pulse check on the macro environment. All right, so as it relates to the macro environment and really what has impacted all assets of all stripes and flavors is, of course, the pace and timing of rate hikes of the U.S. Federal Reserve. This is effectively serving to suck liquidity out of the global economic system in order to at least attempt to quell inflation, right? This is the kind of singular narrative that is dictating everything we see in markets today. And indeed, as expected, we are starting to see CPI turn over a bit. We can see in this view that inflation as measured by the CPI in the US has turned over to about 7.7% year on year as of October. There have been somewhat similar trends in many other countries as well. So you might say to yourself, okay, well, look at that. It's actually working. I mean, we know what a bogus measure of CPI is. We know the absolute number is a lot higher than that. But at least in terms of relative change, like this is probably true, especially as we've seen the price of oil and certain commodities cool off a bit versus several months back. But 7.7 is still quite hot. Right? I mean, we hear the U.S. government talking about wanting to get back to the 2 to 3%. They'll probably re-baseline everyone's expectations and target a 3% instead of the 2%. Totally arbitrary, of course. So really one of the big questions in terms of predicting when this situation will structurally change is, well, when will we get back to that target rate? And government bureaucrats would have you believe that, well, hopefully over the next, year or two. But it begs the question, well, how have things gone in historical episodes of inflation similar to what we're seeing? And so there's this article that was put out by Research Affiliates that demonstrates that if you're running 8+%, it's actually really tough to get that back down. If it was 4%, okay, yeah, obviously a lot easier. 5%, a lot easier. 8+, it's really tough. And typically, and here's the punchline, takes a median of 10 years to get back to that 2 to 3% range. And so this is in line with what I think a lot of macro thinkers such as Lynn Alden have been saying, where it could be spiky. Like you could have bouts of deflation amidst this secularly inflationary decade. And so that's useful historical perspective, that what the government is telling you in terms of the pace of getting inflation down and what we've seen in reality in the past are very much at odds. But what's even more sobering is that that picture doesn't even really take into account the incredibly difficult fiscal position that the US and really all Western sort of social democracies are facing. And so of course we know about the rampant degenerative spending of the government, but what a lot of folks often forget is that we have an absolute tidal wave of entitlement liabilities coming from off-balance sheet to on balance sheet as those debts become due, right? This is a humongous issue. The government cannot print healthcare services. They can't print goods and services. All they can do is print money. And the problem with something like Social Security in the US, one of the big entitlement line items, is that that is actually inflation adjusting. And so that for 2023 is getting adjusted by the highest rate that it's been in 40 years. And so Luke Grumman, one of my favorite macro thinkers, those of you who have watched this channel for some time know that. He has done a lot of great math. You could probably search for it on his Twitter, where he goes through the implications of tax receipts, right, which get hit during a recession, and expenses, particularly in light of this adjustment that will be seen to Social Security. And it is not pretty stuff. And so all of that context really leads to two fundamental choices, at least if history is any guide. The excellent Lords of Finance, The Bankers Who Broke the World by Liaquat Ahmed is a really good analysis of the last sovereign debt bubble. And again, that is what we're facing today. And so if history is any guide, there's really two options here. You have to unwind the monetary bubble and put it in reverse, the start of which is what we've seen over the course of this year with hiking and sucking liquidity out of the system. Although there are other sneaky ways that the Fed can insert liquidity back in without calling it QE, without it looking like QE. It's a topic for another day. The implications of what we just discussed imply that the US will have to issue more debt non-linearly. This is the scary part. So if the Fed is not sopping up that additional supply of government debt, we will see a continuation of what we've seen. Rates going up, dollar going up, and breaking everything like the wrecking ball that it is, ultimately leading to a chaotic collapse of the global economic system. Like, that's just math. Or the Fed steps back in and provides support and liquidity for markets, but then that can have the risk of putting upward pressure back on inflation when it's still running quite hot. So quite the quandary. Do we have any hints of which of those two options we may see? Well, it turns out just a few days ago, Powell gave at least a hint towards reducing the pace of hikes as soon as the December rate hike that we will see in just a little bit later this month. That's at least interesting. And right on schedule, we have this opinion piece in Bloomberg stating that stagflation is just what the economy needs. So the PSYOP has perhaps officially begun. Because again, the government really needs inflation in order to whittle away and inflate away that unsustainable debt burden. But it can't have it too hot to where it is severely impacting the population, which leads to societal unrest and chaos. So, which way, Western man? How will this pan out? Will we see a chaotic collapse of the global economic system? Or do we see the acceptance that, hey, what's done is done, and we basically have some sort of currency devaluation event, maybe dollar versus gold, or something to that effect? And so increasingly, I think CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies, are really a last gasp attempt to kick the can just a little bit more, right? I don't think we're imminently at the change of a system or the changeover point of a system, but we are very late in the game. We're in the ninth inning. And so CBCs to me are increasingly looking like a method by which to wrestle back additional control that will be necessary to kick the can just that little bit more before reality ultimately demands its debt to be repaid. So it'll be very interesting to see, and particularly on the CBDC front, we have seen an absolute orchestra, if you've been paying attention, of Western and others talking about implementing, testing CBDCs. We've seen that in Canada. We've seen that, of course, in Europe. And we've seen that the New York Fed is currently piloting that with select banks in the US. So this is coming. This is arguably here and at our doorstep, as I've been saying for a very long time. So what's the so what of all of that? It's hard to say. You've got these two very binary outcomes that would have completely opposite effects. And so for those of us stacking at pretty much all times, I think we'll continue to see very favorable exchange rates to stack those cheap sats, which you love to see. Could we see another kind of big puke down? Possibly. So, I think it is wise to have some spare powder. And let's be realistic, like amidst what's happening everywhere else, I do think it is useful to think about cash flow, pay off some of your debt if you can, become more nimble, become more self-sovereign, but do have some sort of cash cushion at least for the time being. That is at least how I am thinking about the world. Curious to hear what you think as well. Right, let's move on to our next section, which is regulators revealing who they truly are. As I mentioned in my last video, I am not going to dignify Sam Bankman fraud with a complete covering of what has happened with the FTX debacle. The short version is this is absolute total fraud perpetrated on not only a broad scale, but a scale that clearly includes the media and controlling regime of the US government. And so we have seen some truly, mind-boggling, out in the open parading of Sam as this hero. Oh, he just got it a little bit wrong. He tried his best. He was going to do all this good with all this money. Oh, if he could only have just pulled it off. So his appearance with the New York Times event just the other day was absolutely disgusting. This guy has hurt a lot of people and did it intentionally and knowingly. And yet here we have Maxine Walters just applauding him, wishing him well, let's collaborate. And so if nothing else, I think the probability is rising every day that FTX was a government operation. And as a result, they can now usher in all sorts of regulation. And so while Clown World continues to lower the bar day by day, I am hoping that at least as a side effect, more people, more normies in particular, will awaken to the just total rot that is our political apparatus and related institutions. Like, if you weren't awake yet, will this be the thing that awakens you? If you're still not awake yet, what on earth is it going to take? So who knows? This could be bullish for self-sovereignty, having seen how these criminals operate and reinforcing the age-old principle, not your keys, not your coins. All right, let's move on. The anti-Bitcoin chorus from the ECB has now gotten even louder. The ECB published this piece on November 30th, saying the apparent stabilization of Bitcoin's value is likely to be an artificially induced last gasp before the crypto asset embarks on a road to, quote, irrelevance. Daniel Batten makes a really good point that this is actually very bullish. This is now the ECB directly attacking Bitcoin, not one of its, quote, derivative products, as he calls it, like Digiconomist, right? And I talked about Digiconomist a while ago when we were talking about debunking some of the climate-related FUD that often gets thrown at Bitcoin and is continuing to get thrown at Bitcoin. And so here it is, right? Boss battle time. The actual central banks are coming to the fore and are making their perspectives very much known. Maybe I'm just feeling pretty spicy today, but I want to read you an excellent article from Bitcoiner and Twitter user Cosmo Crickster that I just think captures the spirit of what we're doing so well, and so I want to give it some airtime here. I will read it to you, literally. It is with amusement as well as dismay that I write to you today. On the day of your publication of your ECB blog report, Bitcoin's Last Stand, I am amused because of just how ridiculous and silly you both appear, leaning on tired and long debunked narratives about Bitcoin and its uselessness and waste. And I am disturbed because for two very well-degreed and established members of your field, I'd have expected a much more sophisticated set of critical viewpoints regarding the burgeoning Bitcoin and Lightning networks. You've truly done yourselves a disservice with your amateurish attempts at sowing fear, uncertainty, and doubt about an open source global cooperative project that functions as an ever-growing value storage and transfer system for many tens of millions of people worldwide. One of the big points of this blog post was that Bitcoin, it's not used for anything. It's not used for any legitimate transactions, when that is obviously blatantly false. A system that more and more regular people make use of each year as its effectiveness and ease of use become known to them. And a system that has never been hacked or cracked, which works to bank the unbanked, especially in those countries and places where they have been grievously opposed by sinister totalitarian governments or simply abandoned by the financially developed world. Indeed, Bitcoin is already legal tender in the nations of El Salvador and the Central African Republic, and just yesterday it received special means of payment status in Brazil. It's not without a sense of irony that I write that you missed the mark so thoroughly, specifically because the banking and financial systems you are a part of are responsible for energy and material waste that are orders of magnitude larger than those systems and resources which power and maintain the Bitcoin network. I'm sure you are well aware of the revolutionary carbon and greenhouse gas reducing effects that Bitcoin mining facilities have when they are co-located on methane emitting landfills and or oil production facilities. And I know you're also well informed of solar and wind powered Bitcoin mining clusters helping to set up microgrids in underserved communities. I could go on about how the Lightning Network is being implemented to facilitate remittance payments, as well as to bring financial technology and sovereignty to communities in Latin America and sub-Saharan Africa. But let me just get to the part that simply makes a common man like me profoundly sad. Bitcoin, as you well know, despite your silly and outdated smears, is a technological network that is not based on or debased by national or international debt or the whimsy of politicians. It is a system that is beyond the control of any one person, country, or block of countries. Indeed, if Bitcoin could speak, which in fact it does approximately every 10 minutes through the electromathematical crackle and hum of truth fire, it might echo these words: above all nations is humanity. As bankmen of the European Union, as humans from Earth, as biological entities subject to the same laws of decay and disease as all other beings, wouldn't it be refreshing for you both to welcome a study of and participation in a technology that functions to preserve the work and efforts of the toiling humans of our planet rather than debase them? As a fellow Bitcoiner, Elise Kylene, has repeatedly said, Bitcoin is fintech for poor people. I am grateful for your attention and hope that you will think on and study Bitcoin more profoundly. And that is what this is about. So props to you, Cosmo, for writing an excellent piece there. And to everyone watching, this is the battle of our times. Good versus evil could not be marked as clearly as it is. And I, for one, could not be more excited to be alive to witness and be but a small part of the movement. Now, it's hard to follow that up, but let's keep going. I did want to mention a great thread and accompanying piece from Alex Gladstein that goes into some of the impact that the World Bank and IMF have had on developing countries. I'm not going to go through this in detail. I don't think there's a lot of hugely new information here, but it is really well articulated if you're ever looking for a piece that really thoroughly criticizes the means, intentions, and certainly the outcomes of entities like the World Bank and IMF. And he basically demonstrates how these entities have impoverished nations by making them dependent on their debt and putting in these quote-unquote structural adjustments as conditions attached to loans that dictate how borrowers can run their economy. And so you might have things like favorable rules for multinational corporations, wage ceilings, currency manipulation. All of this is designed, and that has had a net result of between 1960 and 2017, $62 trillion of resources was drained from poor countries to rich ones. Super sobering stuff. And so make no mistake, whether it's regulators by their very own words or through the addition of quality research and materials that further paints the picture of what these regulators have done, the truth is coming out and is becoming more accessible. And I am of the mind that no matter how hard you try to keep the ball underwater, the truth eventually comes out and nothing can stop it. And so with that, let's turn now to our final topic for today, which is just some highlights in the world of Bitcoin mining. It's easy to look at all the doom and gloom out there in terms of where the current price is and how miners' margins are getting clobbered. It's challenging out there, so it'd be very easy to kind of look at Bitcoin mining and conclude with an incredibly negative take on the space, but that totally misses a lot of the developments, some of which we've covered in past videos, but I just want to rattle off a few highlights that caught my eye. One is this new Bitcoin mining report that Daniel Batten has made available. There is some really good data here. What's really notable about this is that it incorporates off-grid mining. So there's on-grid mining and off-grid mining. The off-grid component is really important, and I think a lot of prior analysis hasn't thoroughly brought that into consideration. And so the report concludes that about 52% of Bitcoin mining is zero emissions and is trending more clean by 4.5 points a year. And that is an important data point because you basically have the Bitcoin Mining Council's number, which is about 59%, and the Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance's 37.6%. So there's a big divergence between those two estimates that have really served thus far as this kind of like, well, one is probably biased in one direction, one is probably biased in the other. And you can make the same argument for this latest data point, but again, it incorporates a more thorough data set. So it is comforting that that is closer to the higher end than the lower end of that range. Now, a lot of you watching may say, who cares? Like, whatever. Like, why are we trying to appease and tell this narrative? I think it's critically important for a number of reasons. One is to ensure that the truth is out there and that others who have no idea are not setting the tone, right? We need defenders telling the truth about all sorts of facets of Bitcoin. And secondly, there is some legitimately cool stuff happening, whether it's harnessing energy from the temperature differentials in the ocean, whether it's harnessing energy from landfills. Like, these are meaningful innovations to humanity that extend far beyond Bitcoin mining. And Bitcoin mining is rather that kind of initial settler that can help enable the economics behind some of those innovations. So this is a huge deal and is really, really cool to continue to see. Very much in that same spirit, we saw Marathon Holdings, one of the publicly traded Bitcoin miners in the US here, talking about mining at biofuel sites. So very, very clearly, they are on to something here. And then interestingly, you had this ERCOT report. So ERCOT is the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. Texas is very notable for its sort of open, kind of deregulated energy grid, energy market. And it's being acknowledged in this study that Bitcoin miners are indeed providing a key benefit to the Texas grid. It's expected that Bitcoin mining will provide capacity back to the Texas grid from curtailment. So this means the ability for miners to swiftly shut their operations down, then energy storage, solar, or hydro, at least kind of any of those individually. And so that capacity buffer of about 2.5% that Bitcoin mining can put back to the Texas grid is a pretty big deal, especially when you consider that we're still early days in all of this. And so what this means is that if Texas sees crazy weather events this winter or whatever, and needs to get energy back to the grid, Bitcoin mining helps give a 2.5% buffer to that, which is really, really significant. And so the Texas case study here, I think, continues to evolve. This does not mean that it has been a perfectly smooth path along the way, but as we see this real world case study play out more and more, I think the fundamental and positive synergistic linkage between Bitcoin and energy is becoming more and more obvious, which you love to see. So with all of that, let's go ahead and conclude today's video. All right, there you have it. We covered a little bit of macro and saw that in past cases, inflation that's been above 8% really has not gone back down significantly, at least as quickly as those in power would have you believe. And so as we saw in that opinion piece, perhaps it is time to prepare for stagflation. We talked about regulators showing their true colors. And I think it's important for all of us to be aware both of these examples as well as some of the great materials, because there's still a lot of sleepwalking individuals. Will they ever wake up? Maybe, maybe not. But at least for the people that you care about, your friends, your family, those close to you, I think you want to be sharing these types of things because what is coming is not pretty, especially when we think about CBDCs. But then finally, we ended on a positive note and took a look at some of the very encouraging evidence from the Bitcoin mining world in terms of its very integral relationship with energy. I don't think anyone has an idea of what the full potential of this could be, but it is exciting nonetheless to see. So I think we've got bare winter conditions for some time to come, but it is a great time to be stacking sats. It's a great time to be taking self-custody of your Bitcoin if you haven't already. What on earth is stopping you? Curious to hear, what are your thoughts on any of these topics? Are there other topics you'd like to see covered in future videos? Let me know in the comments down below. But for now, we'll go ahead and leave this here. I hope you found this valuable and insightful. If you did, you already know what to do. give this video a like, share this out using the share feature underneath this video. That really does help get this to more people. And if you are so enamored by this or any other content that you've seen on the channel and want to donate to a pleb, which really does help me continue to make these videos, I will leave my Strike account and Lightning address in the description as well as on the end page that you will see momentarily. But for now, we will leave things here as a reminder, my friends, every sat counts. And until next time, I'll see you then.